Hello once again, everyone. So, I recently had some guests down, and one of the kind of through conversations that we had over the course of the week was talking a little bit about the body as a delivery system. Now, what I mean by this is, oftentimes when we think about swordsmanship and even larger weapons of various kinds, we're thinking more about the weapon itself, the attributes of that weapon, and what our hands are doing. Now, of course, anyone who's spent a little bit of time will also, of course, tell you that footwork is more important, right? That your positioning, your timing, etc., that's really going to be what wins you the day. But I think there is also another attribute of this that is not necessarily spoken about a whole lot, and I just kind of wanted to ramble about today. So, what do I mean by your body as a delivery system? So, what I like to think about this is, and I've got a couple different weapons on the floor ahead of me. The properties of the weapon are the first thing you look at, right? So in this case, I have a nice cut and thrust side sword, but certainly I prefer to thrust with it. So my goal should be to deliver that thrust in as steady of a manner as possible. I'm afforded enough of a guard that I'm comfortable with my hand going out in front of me, etc. Now, all the actions that you'll learn for this sort of thing are going to teach you, the angles to make, etc., and they certainly require the thrust, the footwork, etc., the stance, telling you how to set up for that action, and then, of course, the lunge being the thing that is actually delivering it. Now, that's kind of the key point. The footwork that is specifically done for the strike to reach target with advantage is what I'm talking about. Now, that delivery system can vary sometimes quite a bit, but overall falls under the same kind of general umbrella, that being consistency. So, not even just consistency, but also efficiency. When it comes to launching my attack, I want this to be as connected to me as possible, because otherwise things can start happening when it meets resistance, as you're always going to be attacking either into a full opening, in which case you're anticipating them applying resistance when you're deeper out, or there are guards, etc., that you are moving through, so you're going against them to then get to the juicy bits. You're encountering it earlier. The thing that's going to give you success, both in the ability to deal with these things directly and to then move into other actions, is going to be that consistent baseline. No matter what time I get intercepted, I'm always in the same place. And thus, from that landing point, I can jump off to other things. So, let's talk a little bit about that, for example. So the lunge, one of the most consistent delivery systems we have, right? When I extend my arm and I make my shape, all I need to do is ensure that that shape stays as I push forward. Simple on paper, but not necessarily easy in practice. Because if I focus too much on target, right, and I bring my body forward before I'm extended, now that thrust becomes very inconsistent because it's not locked. This is why the thrust, in regards to what I do, is always 4 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. That allows me to always have this initial engagement beat, right? Before I attack, I always launch here. And that can only be so many positions, right? Terza, quarta, secunda, prima, sometimes some extras. But the idea being, if we're talking Myers rapier, then I might turn up for the shield. But point being, that's where I'm going to notice if there are issues. And I see this a lot in when I'm teaching people. They won't be extending their arm in enough time. They'll bring their body forward too soon. And they don't notice that their hand's not in the right position. But if they get in the habit of lock, then they see and feel what's wrong, because they can see what they're applying their arm against and immediately lock over to the right decision. Now, the thing I think that gets people in this consistency is twofold. Number 1, not wanting the opponent to see what you're doing, and number 2, speed. Obviously, in regards to speed, there's a pretty simple one. Don't mistake fluidity for competence. All right? We want to make sure that even if I move at a slower tempo, if everything is consistent and undeniable, my opponent doesn't have choice but to deal with me in some way. Now, some way can mean a lot of things. Certainly, if you're consistent, one of the things you're going to notice when you're fighting people is that they are going to start developing more consistent actions against you. And that could be a couple different things. Sometimes it's counterattacks, sometimes it's parries, sometimes it is, further traps, etc. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That means that they always respect that initial beginning of your action. that is something that you can then predictably jot down. This person reacts to me when I do this. And that's going to lead into a whole bunch of techniques. The second one, of course, being, so we talked about speed, then there's also denying things for the opponent. That's not necessarily a big deal either, as for the reason I just put forward, right? If I try to go fast and mess up, then I don't get time to see things, right? If I always make it consistent, even while I'm going slow, I'm pretty safe. Because my opponent sees that, realizes things are about to get bad, and have to deal with it. One of the things that definitely I noticed leads to a lot of double hits is the opponent can't see the action you're doing. So not all the time should they, but they should feel it if they can't see it, right? If I'm going to do something that drops into an area where they can't see that strike coming, it should be because they're still reeling from something else that has driven them there. That's the whole consistency thing about it. Now then, a little bit of a rabbit trail. As long as I get this initial tempo going, right? From here on out, all I need to do is make sure that the rest of my body does its job. So I like to think of this decision is now locked in. From here, I just need to push that shape forward in the same way each time, right? And that's where we get into the idea of efficiency. So, depending upon whatever system you're doing, there will be more or less efficient steps to do. Obviously, rapier contains not just the lunge, but also the passing step. Sometimes it is situationally appropriate to do the lunge, sometimes it is situationally appropriate to do the passing step. I have locked in my option, and now I must determine which of those two styles of footwork, or more styles of footwork, is the most efficient way to do it. And that is in regards to then how closely linked my attack and my step is. And for this, I'm going to set down a thrust-oriented weapon and pick up a cut-oriented weapon. Well, somewhat. So, actually, before we get to Messer, we'll get to longsword first. Longsword is one where we're always stepping when we cut, right? And we're not talking about counteractions or anything along those lines. We're talking about, if I launch a cut, I want my body behind it, right? Regardless of what strike I'm doing. For this, the question then becomes, how much of my step matters for that? Because strictly speaking, I could get a lot of strength cutting like that. Alternatively, I can get a lot more speed cutting like that, where the cut's already done before my foot lands. There are different applications there, but the thing that you might want to start looking at is, when do I need the utmost amount of consistency in my delivery of a strike? So, for example, one that I use a lot to illustrate this point, I was just talking about recently, which kind of sparked this video, is the Zwerchau. Now, the Zwerchau can be done in a bunch of different ways, right? But in broadest terms, because that's not what this video is about, it is a horizontal blow with my thumb up, and then it can be done from the other side. So we're striking along this high plane. The question becomes, when do I need my hip behind it? Now, people will do things in different ways. Certainly, I could step, then strike, and that gives me a lot of power behind my Zwerch. Issue with it being, of course, that did I need all of that? Was that the most efficient way for me to deliver it? The way I like to do it is I like to narrow my Zwerch. So the actual cut itself is only going to be from starting here to center line. Reason for this is that everything over here is superfluous. I don't need power there. I need power here. So I push in and I get my cut started, and my foot kicks in as I'm lining up on that. See if I can't do it slower. Comes out, rotates, starts to get moving, and that's when I actually need it applied. The trick there then, making sure that everything else is consistent. My left arm, my right foot, turning my hips, my back leg springing me forward. That needs to all be an efficient delivery system to make this strike work the way I want it to work. If one of those is not doing its job, it can no longer do what it used to be doing. And this is illustrated in a bunch of other cuts too, right? Even your bog standard overhaul or fendenti, etc. It's all about not stepping first then hewing. It's not about pushing the arms out and then stepping because it brings you closer. It's about when that cut, oftentimes the one you hear, when that cut is gonna land, that's when I want my foot in conjunction with it. Of course, the hands have a little further to go, sometimes much further to go. But I want it to be consistent. I want to basically be jumping from whatever position into this shape with as little change as possible, so that all my opponent gets to deal with is the advantage of an extended guard. Which, oh look, what's the difference between this to this shape and this to this shape? I'd argue nothing. It's just about making sure that following my extension toward my opponent, I can then push that desirable shape forward and make sure that there's enough of my body behind it supporting that shape that it can't be led astray. And if it is led astray, it'll be led astray in either an advantageous way for me, which is predictable, or I will be able then to work off of it because it has made me safe and I'm landing in a place that I know I'm going to be in. There's a lot of different things I can do out of these shapes. Every single fighting system has one. You have some form of extension, because that's the only way we can hit each other, unless we get really polite and get really close to each other. That means, as long as I can land here, regardless of their sword is there, the sword is here, I've almost got target, I'm nowhere near target. Everything else is linked. And I can just make my decision based off that feeling. It becomes a lot less of a guessing game and a lot less of, I'm just going to fire this combo, come hell or high water, and a lot more of starting point, landing point, finishing point, wherever I need to go. Now, this same idea also is going to apply a lot when it comes to smaller stuff, where your weapon is more disconnected from you. And for this, I've decided to use the Messer as an illustration. Not that there aren't other swords that do this, but in regards to all the weapons that I do, this one feels the most disconnected from me. And by that I don't mean in tuneness. I'm talking about I've kind of got to let the Messer do its job too, and then I just need to be supporting it. So we see a couple different things. We see the Messer come up, and then from that point of power, I step in. We see the Messer raised to gain a little bit of momentum so it can turn in space. We see that with both the Trustau and also the, why am I forgetting? Basically Shilhau. I don't remember why I'm forgetting the term. What is it? I'll remember later. Either way, you also see that same sort of idea with the Gewehrhau, this danger strike, right? It's basically Scheitelhau. Up, disconnect, right? If I try to force that, try to control that, it's going to end up with a lot of pain right here. But if I focus on the strike has come up, I'm in my loaded position, now I just need to make the delivery system. The weight of the sword's going to do its job. I just need to make sure that when it's landing, I am not working against it. I'm letting it do its thing. Same thing's definitely true in a lot of other instances. And as such, it doesn't necessarily always have to be as directly connected. It just needs to make sure that it allows the strike to fill out in a space that it needs to. Another example, to put the Messer down for a minute, since I just thought of it, sometimes you cut in different tempos, right? So for those of you that are in the open classes, you'll remember this combination. We stepped up with a thrust, our thrust was set aside, and then we cut back. The key there being, this delivered my thrust and centered it with me. When it was set aside, we talked about how my hand cuts at a slightly different rhythm than my body. Not that I can't directly link my cut to my step, but that's not advantageous in the moment. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about currently, we've been parried on a thrust, we're targeting the arm as we lead. That's our objective. So, all I need to make sure, my hands get deloaded, the sword starts to fall, and now it is appropriate for my leg to come back because it's doing its job. Kind of two different rhythms going on there. Just making the delivery system that I need. I know I'm kind of saying that over and over again like it's a buzzword, but that's how I've been thinking of it recently, and that's what's made things a lot easier, a lot more certain. Another example of this would be if we start talking about not necessarily disconnected from you, but extension. And for this, I've decided to illustrate with the halberd. So, We talked about, things moving into their extended nature. If I try to control my halberd too much, too directly, then I'm going to naturally want it to be closer to me, which is fine. I can certainly fight with it like this, but now I'm giving up the ability to use my extended guard. So, when it comes to fighting out with more extension, then it really, really matters in that consistency. Is it any surprise why one of the first things you do in Meyer section on this, at least, is those cross cuts I was just talking about, or your driving cuts. Because all I really need to do is get this moving and then ensure that when it reaches target, I'm where I need to be. You see this also in a couple of its initial actions. Starting off in high guard on the left, and the idea of bringing that foot up. Looks funky at first, but if I just bring my arms down, that disconnects it from me. If I just try to do a lunge, that also kind of disconnects it from me. That'd be much better if I was doing a thrust, because of that chop. If I bring my foot up, now my hip is kind of linked to it. That's very comfortable. A strange, but efficient delivery system. Because I want to move from this shape to this shape. So I do what I need to do. Really the thing I'm getting at with this video that I kind of want people to question in themselves and see if you can find how it is that you move is focus on the handwork and the footwork only in the beginning, right? What blade orientation do I need? Where's my target area? How close do I need to be? And from there, work on how you're powering that shape in against your opponent. And if you cannot do that consistently, it's probably not your hands not doing the right thing, or well, it is possibly, but one of those pieces in your delivery system, one of the changes from initial shape to second shape isn't firing the way it's supposed to. And that's probably what's letting you down. I see that happen a lot, little things, left hand being a little too low, a little too high, the tip not quite being where it needs to be, not landing with both feet at once, but landing instead 1, 2, so the core is going the wrong way. These, I think, can be kind of grouped together in that umbrella I was just talking about of how you push your shape forward. And, maybe you'll use a different term to explain it, but I find when I think about it that way, it's not terribly difficult to practice my techniques. And then when I need to use them, they fire the way I need them to, and I can react off of them. But either way, some pontifications for you. I hope you enjoy. Thank you very, very much for listening. We'll go over some other techniques another time.